Hello class, this is Mr. Mormon. Welcome to video 4 in our series on genetics. Today we're going to be talking about meiosis. So let's start with a definition. Meiosis is a type of cell division which produces sperm and egg. Now we've already talked about mitosis, and you can go back and watch the video on that. Mitosis is how body cells are made, for example. And in mitosis you end up with cells that have they're like clones. You get a full set of DNA. In meiosis, you end up with cells that have a half set of DNA. And that's very important because sperm and egg need to come together to make the next generation. So they each need to have a half set of DNA so that you have the proper amount in the zygote, in the fertilized egg at the end. Now you'll remember from a past video we talked about asexual and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is where there's only one parent. All of the genes come from one parent, like this spider plant here. Each of these little plants that's growing off of it could grow into a new plant. It would be a clone of the parent. It would have the exact same DNA. Same thing's going on here with this strawberry, some of these tuber and bulb plants. And here we see a hydra, a little animal which reproduces asexually by making new little hydras, but there's only one parent. A lot of single-celled organisms reproduce this way as well. But in this video, we're talking about sexual reproduction. This is where there's a pair of genes. There's two parents. Each is contributing half of the DNA to the offspring. Sexual reproduction involves sperm and egg. Sperm from the male, and it contains a half set of DNA from dad, and egg from the mom, which also contains a half set of DNA. When the two come together in fertilization, you end up with a full set of DNA in the fertilized egg or the zygote. Okay, let's get that vocabulary down. A gamete is a sex cell, that would be sperm or egg. Fertilization, that's when sperm and egg come together and they form a zygote, that is a fertilized egg. Now recall, as we learned in an earlier video when we were talking about Mendel and his pea plants, that plants do reproduce sexually. The sperm is found in the pollen grain, and the egg is in this middle part of the flower called the pistil. See these little things called ovules? Those are the eggs. But they have to be fertilized. The pollen has to get onto the tip of the pistil, which is called the stigma. It's sticky up there, and the pollen will stick to it. Maybe it's carried there by a bee, maybe it's just carried by the wind, or some flowers can even pollinate themselves. The pollen is coming from this part, the stamen. That produces the pollen. Pollen then gets attached to the tip of the pistil, and it grows this long pollen tube, and the sperm cells will travel down to the ovules, fertilizing those ovules. Those will then develop into the seed. If this flower never gets pollinated, you will never get seeds. The same goes for fruit. A lot of plants will produce a fruit around the seed. If there's no pollination, you will not get seeds, you will not get fruit. Now, of course, once you have that seed, that's the beginning of the next generation. So here's a diagram of meiosis. Here's meiosis producing sperm cells. Here's meiosis producing an egg cell. Now notice that we start out with a cell with a full set of DNA. That would be a diploid cell. Now diploid cells, like all body cells, have a full set of DNA. There's pairs of chromosomes. The chromosomes come in pairs because one half of the pair came from the mother and one half of the pair came from the father. But when sex cells are created, they have to be created haploid, meaning they only have a single set of chromosomes, so that when they come together in the fertilized egg, you end up with the proper amount of DNA. A half set of chromosomes from mom and a half set from dad gives you the full set that you need. Now, when I talk about homologous chromosomes, what I mean is in body cells, you have pairs of chromosomes where one has come from the mother and one has come from the father. Now, remember in humans, if we could photograph the chromosomes and arrange them and put them in order, that's called a karyotype, it would look like this, where the largest pair of homologous chromosomes would be number 1, and it would go down to number 22. There'd be 22 autosomal chromosomes, and then 1 pair, which are the sex chromosomes. Now this is XX, so this would be a female, but these are all the homologous pairs. Again, 1/2 of the pair came from the mother, 1/2 came from the father. There's a total of 23 chromosomes, 23 pairs of chromosomes, and a total of 46 altogether. Again, in human cells, you're going to have 22 pair of autosomal chromosomes, numbered 1 to 22, largest to smallest, 1 pair of sex chromosomes for a total of 23 pairs, which would be 46 total chromosomes. Again, that's for humans. Each species of organism is going to have its own number of chromosomes. And again, body cells will be diploid, like we see here, pairs. Sex cells are going to be haploid with only a half set, only 1 of each pair. So back to this diagram, we can see the sex cells created here are all haploid. They each have a half set of DNA. Now you'll notice a bit of a difference here. We've made 4 cells. Basically, it starts out very similar to mitosis. Meiosis 1 is very similar to mitosis, where 1 cell copies its DNA, splits up the chromosomes, and you end up with 2 cells. But then you get another cell division, which is what gives you 4 cells in the end. But this time the DNA is not copied, so you end up with a half set of DNA after meiosis 2. Now, in humans, you don't create 4 egg cells. Actually, only 1 of the 4 cells that's created actually grows into an egg. The other 3 are called polar bodies and do not develop into the egg. So only 1 egg is produced. The other 3 actually support and nourish the one that develops into an egg, but they themselves do not become egg cells. We call those polar bodies. An important thing to understand here is that meiosis and sexual reproduction produces genetic diversity. In asexual reproduction, the offspring are clones of the parent. In sexual reproduction, you get new combinations of DNA through genetic recombination and the segregation of alleles. Now, Mendel gave us 2 laws of inheritance. The law of segregation states that the alleles of each gene separate from each other during meiosis when gametes are formed. The law of independent assortment says alleles separate independently. Now the second one is a little controversial because actually today we know that some alleles actually, it's the chromosomes that assort independently. And on a single chromosome you actually may have many different genes. So sometimes they are actually linked, and we'll see some examples of that when we look at sex-linked traits. Those would be genes that are carried on the sex chromosomes. So there's really 2 ways that we end up with new combinations of DNA when we create sperm and egg. One is there's that random segregation and assortment of the chromosomes. The chromosomes split, and then it's random how which one goes into which sperm. So that's one way that the DNA gets mixed up. Another way is with crossing over. Like you see here, during meiosis, the homologous pairs come very close together when they line up in the middle of the cell, and they can actually cross over like you see happening here, and they can swap ends, giving you a brand new combination that did not exist before. So the random assortment of the chromosomes and the crossing over leads to whole bunches of new DNA combinations. And that's why meiosis and sexual reproduction evolved. It gives more variation. And as we learned earlier, that variation, that biodiversity is very good and very healthy for the species. Okay, let's wrap up with a little video.
The cell prepares for meiosis just as it does for mitosis. But as the DNA condenses, each chromosome finds its homologous counterpart. These matching pairs of chromosomes hold equivalent genetic information, one set from mother and one from father. Next comes the first shuffle of nature's genetic deck. The two homologs trade genes in a process called crossing over. This forms new hybrid chromosomes. The spindles then place maternal and paternal chromosomes randomly on each side of midline. It is another shuffle that can lead to a host of different genetic outcomes. Finally, spindle fibers pull the homologs apart. This leaves the sister chromatids intact. With twice the amount of genetic information the cells will need, nature must cut the genetic deck in two. The second division produces 4 unique sets of chromosomes. Because they carry half the genetic information, we call these haploid cells. Many of them will mature into sperm and eggs, the reproductive cells called gametes.
Okay, I think that's enough for this video. Again, if you have any questions, as always, just ask me in class tomorrow.